Hello and welcome to the Connected Leadership Podcast. I'm Andy Lopata. Thank you very much for joining me. I am joined today by two people I've known for a long time, have worked closely with, whose company I've enjoyed a lot over a number of years, and I've really been looking forward to this conversation. My first guest is Phil Jones. Phil is the managing director of Brother UK, and he is a very successful business leader. He's a winner of regional business awards, Northwest Business Person of the Year amongst them, and he's someone that I quote in a lot of my talks. He's been quoted in my books. We've had a number of conversations. You can find videos with me talking to Phil on YouTube. We've talked a lot over the years about all manner of things to do with business. But the reason Phil is on this conversation with me today, Phil and I met through Twitter. We just started engaging with each other's tweets. I think actually Phil started engaging with mine because we had a mutual contact, Warren Cass, if I remember correctly. And off the back of that, Phil invited me to be his guest at Business Awards that Brother was sponsoring, and we got to know each other and grow the relationship from there. So Phil really stands out for me as a senior level business leader who's very actively engaged in social media and continues to be to this day, because that was quite a number of years ago when we first engaged. And I've invited to join us someone that Phil and I share in common as a mutual contact, and someone we work with, and that's Sam Rathling, who's the founder and chief visionary officer of Pipeline 44. Sam actually reached out to me after seeing me speak because she was working with Brother and brought me in to work with the Brother Europe division. And Sam and I have worked quite closely on that Brother account, making sure that our different approaches fit together. So it made sense to bring Sam in on this conversation as well, because what I want to look at is how leaders can embrace social media and why it's so important. So many of the people that I work with in leadership roles see it as a distraction, particularly LinkedIn, which is what most people will focus on. But we have someone here, Phil, who doesn't see it as a distraction, but actually uses it as an essential tool, and someone else who works with leaders to help them make much more of LinkedIn in particular. So it seemed to make sense to bring both together onto the podcast. So Sam and Phil, thank you very much for joining me, and it's always great to be chatting with you.
Morning, Andy. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here, and I can't wait to have this conversation with Phil.
Phil,
hello everybody.
Phil, let's start with your approach to social media, because I've talked there about how we connected through Twitter. You've remained engaged. I still see you posting frequently on social media to this day, and not just posting this is the latest Brother product, but really engaging with people in the way you approach it. How central is it to your role, and what does it allow you to do that you couldn't do before, if you can remember that far back?
I can indeed, Andy. Yes, and when I kind of was thinking about this question, I got thinking about a job that I'd recently done, which is really beginning to record the competencies needed, in my view, to be a senior leader in today's modern economy. And when I looked across those competencies, I'm currently at 52, Andy, competencies needed, and of which about 32 of those are sort of technical subject matter based competencies, and around 20 of those are kind of what I would describe as leadership competencies that you need to display to actually run the business or culture. And in that 32, that sort of first part, social media is one of them, and content actually. And that falls into kind of a wider sort of theme around marketing. So for me, to be relevant today, a leader absolutely has to be on social media, in my opinion. People expect it. When I onboard people at Brother, I meet everybody that joins the business. I ask them, what investigation work did you do before you joined us? Where did you look? And they're looking at the leader, whether they're active on social media, they're looking at the business itself, What things are they saying? When did they last post? Do you have a sense of modernity? Whatever that might be. So for now, for me, to be in sort of 2022 and to be a leader and not on social media, I'm not actually sure you're sending out such a great message to either future talent or indeed a customer base that may also be considering to do business with you.
What sort of response are you getting from other leaders when you discuss this with them, particularly those that aren't as active as you?
Mixed, frankly, and I'm sure Sam's got a lot of contribution to make here. For many, they really just don't see it as part of the skill stack of a CEO. They just see financial management, running the business, preparing the management accounts, checking the strategy, all that kind of good stuff. But I think you've got to really think of it in terms of expectation economy. Think about you in your personal life when things don't go right. What's the first thing you want to do? You want to think about how you complain or how you raise an issue or get more information. So for me, access to senior people is really important. People don't have time. And as a result of that, their expectation of you as a business is that you are responsive. If they do have an issue that they want to raise, they want to know whether or not you as a business are taking them seriously. So for a customer focused business like Brother, whether that be with a channel partner or indeed an end user of our product, having that kind of direct line, that direct response, for me is an absolute mandatory as part of our customer value proposition.
So can I play devil's advocate just on that point for the moment? There's a danger, obviously, there that you're going to create an expectation amongst your customers that they've got access to you when in fact it's someone else's role to engage with that, and that's going to be a distraction to you in your job and what you need to do. And I can see a lot of leaders thinking that way. How do you manage that?
Pretty simple, really. I have my technical support teams monitoring all the right hashtags that already exist on social media. So fundamentally, most of the interventions that need to take place are already being taken place. It's just that somebody is probably likely to find you as the most senior person in the business first and tag you. I.e., so the key thing is just making sure you have other processes that sit behind the business that can jump in. All really people are saying is, I want to be heard, I'm feeling frustrated, I'm somehow not getting listened to, or I don't have time, or it's urgent. So as long as you have the background processes to do those things, that's totally fine. There are other times, of course, when things are perhaps more serious, whether it's a customer related issue, where actually, yeah, I will jump in and I'll have a quick look at it and go, yeah, do you know what, that does need me to say something, and I will. But I guess we'll come back to this issue at some stage of, well, how much time do you spend a day on social media? Because that's one of the questions I get asked a lot. So hopefully we'll have a chance to answer that, Andy, as we chat today.
Well, that was actually going to be my next question to you, but I was going to bring in Sam first. So I will come back to you on that in a few moments. But Sam, I introduced Phil as someone that I see as a standout leader when it comes to engagement on social media.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you see? Are there many people that are engaging at the level that Phil is? And if not, what would you say is what's the blend that you see when you're engaging with different large businesses?
Well, first off, Phil is a prime example of someone who has totally embraced social selling, both on the LinkedIn environment and other platforms as well. So he's always someone that I reference whenever I'm doing training with other leaders as somebody to look at, because Phil, you've done an amazing job at building your personal brand, positioning yourself as a thought leader, as somebody who is an industry expert. And, that will help you in your role as a leader, but also, as you've already mentioned, it is a lot to do with attracting great talent. It is a lot to do with perception and reputation, because ultimately, whether it's your LinkedIn profile or whether it's your any other profile on social, that is your digital reputation. And I don't think enough leaders really understand the importance of personal brand. And yes, you work within a larger organization, which has its own, brand values, etc. But it's so important. People will go and check you out. People will go and look at leaders of an organization before they join one. So I think Phil is a shining example of someone that absolutely embraces the role of a leader within the social environment. And I just wish more leaders were like Phil and actually understood the power of building your personal brand through social media.
So when you're talking to other leaders, and I'm I know that a lot of the work you do at Pipeline 44 is around taking on a lot of the LinkedIn work from busy companies and doing that lead generation for them. So when you're talking to other leaders about the importance of engaging, let's stay on LinkedIn, and I think LinkedIn can speak for different platforms, and I'll come to that later. But when you're talking to them about the importance of engaging on LinkedIn themselves, how do you sway them? How do you bring them? How do you win them over, and what sort of impact is that making?
So the first thing I get them to do is I get them to take a step back and actually look at their own LinkedIn profile through the eyes of a few different people. So firstly, through the eyes of their existing customers. Like if you were an existing customer of your business and you went to look at your own LinkedIn profile, what would you think about you? How does it represent you? Are you showing up as the best version of yourself? So that's one way to look at their profile. The second thing is through the eyes of somebody that might be looking to join your business. If you are practically invisible on social media and you're looking to attract great talent, which let's face it, in current times is one of the hardest things to do, then you are going to be missing an absolute trick when it comes to that side of things. So imagine you're a candidate, who's an A-star talent, an A-star player who could pick any company to work for, and they go check you out on LinkedIn. What are they going to think? And then look at it through the eyes of your partners and look at through the eyes of all different people and step back, because the LinkedIn profile is the first, thing that people look at. It's the shop window to the world. Your LinkedIn profile is networking 24/7 when you're in meetings, when you're on holiday, when you're enjoying time with your family. Your LinkedIn profile is out there representing you and representing your company brand as well. So I get first off people to really take a hard look at their own profiles and think, really, would I be impressed if I was somebody looking from the outside in? So that's the first thing. And that's really one of the fundamentals. And I think the second thing to realize is that a lot of companies are really focused on their marketing department putting content out onto their company page, which is something that I recommend that they do. But a person inside a company and all of the staff that work inside an organization will get 10 times the reach of any post that goes out on a company page. So imagine multiplying that up across the leadership team, across your C-suite, across all of your staff, whether they work in sales or any other department. If everybody in the organization embraced social selling and embraced the power of content, especially when it's free and organic, especially on platforms like LinkedIn, the power of that is unbelievable, and the reach that a company can have and the competitive advantage that somebody can have. So I think it's about getting people to understand what that actually means and overcoming this fear, because I think a lot of leaders have a lot of fear around social selling. They put these crazy social media policies in place that make everybody so scared to post anything on the newsfeed for fear of doing something wrong. And they really don't understand that, the power of these platforms is unbelievable for their business. So I think for me, when I'm trying to sway them to consider it, it's about helping them to understand what that reach can actually do for their business and really sharing case studies and sharing stories of companies like Brother, for example, that have gone out there and spent years embedding social selling into their culture.
I want to sort of really dig a bit deeper into this question of the content that you post, because you talked about using the example of the reach individual profiles have against company page. So if everyone on the leadership team shares that content, then you've got greater reach. I think that's great. I have one issue with it, and that is that with the clients that I work with on LinkedIn, I will tend to find that they will only share company branded content that's been created for them by the marketing department. And I find that levels of engagement are really low. And it doesn't tell me anything about them. It doesn't get me to engage. Phil, if I can come to you, I want to come to both of you on this question, but I'll come to you first. That's not your content. In fact, I think when I see your content, it's not that often about Brother products. It's there, but it's not that often. It's a much varied range, which differs from others within Brother, and it differs from other clients that I work with. How do you decide what you're going to share, and what's the right blend for you?
Yes, for me, the last thing people want to be seeing is just me pumping out adverts for Brother. It's a complete waste of people's time and energy. What they do want to understand is actually, for example, and when I talk to people about why they should engage, it's like, what unique knowledge do you have that you think you could possibly share with other people, which actually is going to make them better, or improve their life or their business or their businesses? And if you were to share that with them and they think that was really good, it's highly likely that they would consider you at some point in the future in their top three box for purchase. So you begin to generate familiarity. Now, as far as I'm concerned, I always look at, what is that specialist knowledge that I have? Well, I've got specialist knowledge of sales because I came up through the company. I've always been in sales for nearly 30 years. Sales and marketing. I've got unique experience of what it takes to get to the board of a company when you started as a salesperson. So I started in sales and I ended up as the managing director of this large technology company, household name. And people are interested, how did you do that? And how could I do that? Then what are the unique characteristics, for example, I said a moment ago, or competencies that you need to run a business? So when you're in the chair, what's it like? What is it like to be this person that's got to have all these skills and to keep it, grow a culture and attract talent and do social media, all of these things? How do I do that? And particularly also the leadership play within that. So I tend to keep my posts in those genres and I don't go outside of those lanes very much. And that way you build that individual reputation or expertise, which people then have that kind of go-to moment. Oh yeah, if I want to read something around this, then I go to Phil. So whenever I'm looking around for content, and there's sometimes just small stories or interactions or things that I see, I think, oh, that's interesting. There's an insight about that which I think is good to share. It doesn't take long to quickly type that insight up and share that with people. So I think the key thing for me is if I looked at that balance, Andy, you would probably see about 1 in 30 posts from me which might be brother related. The other 29 will probably be leadership, culture, personal development, environmental social governance, just general things or sharing of lessons learned around my personal journey, which I hope would help others.
So let's look at that personal journey, because one of the areas of resistance I come across a lot is actually sharing something personal. And being human. And the point I try and make is that you're trying to connect human to human. Phil Calvert, who's someone who works with LinkedIn with the financial services, said it's a social network, with emphasis on the social. How do you get that balance between being professional on there and staying in those lanes that you've chosen, but also letting people know Phil Jones rather than Brother UK?
Yeah, and this again just comes down to how you curate your content, Andy. I notice, and I'm sure Sam will have a comment on this, that the number of posts I see on LinkedIn at the moment that says, "I know this isn't a personal platform, but," every post seems to be starting with that at the moment. Whereas I try not to do that, I guess. Or if I'm going to share something or share an insight, I shared an insight relevant to a new puppy that we had. That's a personal insight, yes, but actually there was a bit of learning that supported it. So people get that, oh, there's a cute puppy, and it was a cute puppy photo, no doubt. I didn't do it for that. What I got was sort of how you got to readjust your life and the way you run your life when you've got this new thing come back into your house and how all your schedules get kind of disrupted to some degree. So there's always a message in everything, but I tend to keep I don't overshare my personal life. That's probably a better way to put it. I don't overshare. You may give an occasional insight, perhaps on, for me, something like Twitter. I might reveal more personal insights there, but I tend to keep LinkedIn mostly professional, 95 to 98% of the time, in my opinion.
That way, you're using a personal experience to produce professional insights. I think does provide a nice bridge. So it's not like Facebook, but it's got to be authentic. It can't be shoehorned in. And that's what I'll often try to do, sometimes just with a sense of humor. But whereas on Facebook or Instagram, I'll post a picture of I go for walks in the lovely area I live. I love taking nature photography around there. I'll just post the images. On LinkedIn, I might say, I've just delivered this, I've just done that. Now I need some fresh air and I'm looking after myself, and just create that professional twist to it. And I think that that lands better with people on LinkedIn.
There is one more thing, Andy, which I think is worth raising, which is I write all my own stuff. An agency doesn't do it for me.
Yeah.
And I know that, again, sometimes when I've been and I've discussed this idea with other senior leaders, they've just come back with, oh, brilliant, I'll get the PR company to write me a few posts. And it's kind of, you just get totally found out. And, it's really about that authentic experience. So basically, if you're going to share and you're going to start ramping up your content, then just make sure it's you.
That's a really important point. And after this, I'll come to Sam for your perspective on everything we've just talked about. So I hope you've been listening. But a good friend of mine, a former podcast guest, I'm not going to name and shame, I haven't got his permission to do that, but he posted on LinkedIn about 2 months ago saying, I'm now got someone who I'm still going to write the posts, but I've got someone who's going to post it for me because I'm just focusing on how I spend my time. And his posts are brilliant. They're provocative. He's one of the best posters I know on LinkedIn, and the conversation they generate is engaging and vibrant. And my response to him was, please don't do this. Yes, you're going to write them, but you're not going to be around to comment on them. And if you're not commenting on them, you're broadcasting, not engaging. And I think that's going to impact that discussion. And I've seen him post much more frequently because we know someone's doing it for him, but he's not responding to comments. And the discussion is just dying a death. And you talk about the authentic experience. That's not him. That's not his personal brand, and I think it's damaging to him in the long term. So I'm pleased you said that. And if he's listening, you know who you are. Sam, so what's your take on, first of all, getting the right blend of putting the marketing messaging out there? And obviously you're talking a lot about social selling and you're coming from that sales perspective, but getting that mix between getting that sales message out there and being yourself and letting people in and engaging in conversation, and then how people let their personal side shine through in a way that everyone could be comfortable with on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I think what Phil said is, definitely echoes what I would share as well. I mean, there's always a business or professional angle to any personal story. So it's okay to pull back the curtains a little bit on who you are as a person, because ultimately people buy from people. It is about that human connection. And, if somebody is training for a marathon or has got something going on in their life that you can connect with, you might just move somebody that's in your pipeline or somebody that's been watching you. You just might make that connection with them in a completely different way because you shared something outside of, your brand, your product, etc. So I think it's really important to have an element of personal. And I agree with you, Phil. It does wind me up that people start all their posts with, I know this is a personal story, but I think it's, a good mix. I'd say for me, I go with the kind of 90% of the posts need to be kind of more professional. And then it's okay to bring 5 to 10% of them in on a personal story. I'll quite often share stuff about my kids or, but it will be lessons that I've learned along the way and how I can apply them in a business environment. I think people often think that content creation takes too much time and it's a big effort. It doesn't have to be every single day. It doesn't have to be 3 times a day. It can be 3 times a week. If somebody just went from not posting anything to posting 3 times a week consistently, but not resharing someone else's content, actually being an original content creator, it still baffles me that there's only 3 to 5% of members on LinkedIn, and there are over 800 million of them now, that actually post their own original content. I think just take that statistic, if you're in that small minority of people who are actually posting, and the leadership team of the other companies that you compete against are not and are practically invisible, you can totally elevate your brand as a leader and totally elevate your brand as an overall business just by getting visible on the newsfeed. So for me, content is about raising your visibility, but also raising your credibility. If you do both of those 2 things at the same time, and really position yourself in the right way, content can really take you to a whole other level. I love the fact that you post your own content, Phil. I think that's fantastic. And I see you engaging all the time on the newsfeed, but something like engagement does not have to take a huge amount of time. It's a 3 to 5 minute a day job maximum. You know, it's very easy to do on the mobile app. It's very easy to do in between meetings or while you're waiting for someone to show up for a Zoom call. It doesn't have to be a big chunk out of your day. And content for me is everywhere. You know, every single day you're around content, but if you're not tuned into, oh, I need to post about this, then it's quite hard to see it. So I think people get stuck with, what am I going to post about? They look at the page, think, I know I need to be posting, but what on earth am I going to post about? So just a really easy style of post is a documentary style. So it's just sharing what you're up to. I mean, Phil, you did a great post the other day about you being at an event. You were talking about culture. You posted a great picture and you shared some of the learnings that you'd had from being in a room talking about culture. It was a fantastic post. So I think, you know, just every single diary entry that a leader has is an opportunity to create a piece of content. In fact, for me, it's 3 pieces of content, because if you've got something in your diary, you can have a before post, a during post, and an after post. So that's 3 pieces of content from every single appointment in your diary. And just looking at your calendar can actually give you some inspiration. And the other thing with documenting is also then to think about taking photographs or taking videos whenever you're, you know, with your team, or whenever you're out and about an event or things like that. So it's just about tuning into the fact that content is everywhere, and it's not difficult when you start to actually do it. I think it's just a case for most leaders of just starting and not worrying about the views and worrying about the engagement in the beginning. It's just about getting that consistency of actually getting on the newsfeed and posting something and getting started.
There's a few things I want to pick out from that, if I can. The first is you talked about it's not difficult to engage on a regular basis. You said 3 to 5 minutes maximum. I pose what I call the 10-minute challenge to the groups I work with, which is 10 minutes a day on your newsfeed. If you're commuting, which is obviously coming back now, in between meetings, downtime, get your phone, go to the LinkedIn home app, scroll through the news feed, stroll through it so you're not stuck with the same people at the top every time, and like, comment, or share. And score yourself 1 point for liking, 2 points for commenting, 3 points for sharing, and set yourself a target for the week. And that alone would accelerate you into that upper percentile of LinkedIn users in terms of engagement.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think we're on the same page with that, absolutely.
There's actually a new feature on LinkedIn that might help people with this, because I know the newsfeed can get quite clogged up and it can often have things that are irrelevant in there. What you can now do is, if you're following somebody on LinkedIn, you can now ring a notification bell on their profile so that every time they post, you get notified that they have posted something. So if I were to ring Phil's bell on his, metaphorically, on your LinkedIn profile, Phil, I would get notified every time you post something, which means that I'm now seeing the content in my newsfeed of my customers, of my prospects that are in my pipeline, of the leaders that I want to follow. And actually that engagement, if you engage very intentionally on the posts of your customers, partners, people in your pipeline, etc., that one feature is really helping to drive what's coming into my newsfeed. So that might be a tip for people as well to follow.
It's a great tip, one I discovered a week or 2 ago, and I think it's a brilliant one. And it's all about being insight in mind, and you can't do that if you're just reading someone's posts. You need to let them know that you're actively doing it. So that's on the engagement area. I was going to ask you, because I know a lot of people struggle to think, where do I get started in creating content? But I think you've answered that brilliantly. So instead, I'm going to ask you what you think about the various types of posts people can post up there. So you talked about taking an engaging photo. How important is that to get your post noticed? Are polls worth doing? I mean, I've got a slide that I share with my LinkedIn sessions, where someone posted, how many cups of coffee do you drink a day? And they were over 1,000 votes in a few days, which may be baffling to a lot of people, but they got engagement, and they're reaching out to people who are engaging with that poll. So, whether it's polls, whether it's photos, whether it's anything else, what do you think people need to be aware of, and what do you think might be a bit of a distraction, Sam?
So one of the things to be aware of with the LinkedIn algorithm is, one of the things that prioritizes posts is a couple of things. So the first thing is dwell time. So that is how long is somebody staying on my post for. So that's why you see things like text only posts that are quite lengthy and quite long and take a lot of time to read doing quite well. Even though they have no images, no photos, no videos, anything with them, if somebody clicks on that see more button and opens up the long text post and actually spends time reading it, that's going to trigger the algorithm to say, well, people are engaging heavily with this post because they're spending a lot of time on that post. It's why document posts do quite well. Hardly anybody uses document posts, and that's simply uploading a PDF or uploading a PowerPoint slide deck. But because it takes people a while to scroll through the carousel of those pages, the dwell time on those is quite high. So text only posts do very well at the moment. At the time of recording this, it changes all the time. Document posts will do quite well. An engaging video where there's either strong education or entertainment will do quite well as well. Images, I think, yeah, it's important to use them for visual, obviously, but I tend to find that the ones that have a multitude of images, so kind of 5 to 8 images, tend to do better than where it's just one. But for me, it's more important that the quality and the engagement level on the post is high. And one of the best ways to do that is to actually include a question within the post, because when you ask a great question, you drive engagement and you drive discussion underneath the post. And, you know, if you can create people's opportunity to put their opinion underneath the post, and people are using quite strong and longer comments underneath the post, all of that is triggering the algorithm to show more people that post. So just like you said earlier, Andy, the importance of engaging back. If you're not commenting back on people's comments, you're missing a huge opportunity to keep that post running for 2, 3, 4 weeks. And even when you're replying to people in the comments, use questions, because people will answer underneath, and suddenly you'll have a whole discussion happening underneath the post. And I think one thing that people don't realize is that, you know, when you comment on someone else's post or engage with someone else's post, it's not just the person who created the post that you're getting visible with. You're getting visible with every single other person that has already liked, commented, reacted to that post. So if you go in, and my CEO does this all the time, he's quite opinionated. So my business partner, Nick, he will tend to go in and put quite a strong opinion on other people's posts. And it's usually quite the opposite of what the person has said, because he likes to, you know, be a little bit divisive in terms of his opinions, and you know, his opinions are quite strong. So he'll put comments underneath other people's posts, but he'll receive 500, 800 connections a month off the back of his engagement and he's not a prolific poster, but he's a prolific engager on the newsfeed. So I think just understanding some of these things that actually drive the algorithm. There are, I mean, polls are, you mentioned polls, they are definitely not as popular as they were. There's always a flavor of the month kind of type of post, and polls obviously had their day. They still are quite popular, and I would always recommend, if you are going to do a poll, that you choose 4 options, but the 4th one being something else, comment below, rather than just picking 4 things for people to choose from, because that way you're driving engagement again underneath the post. But I mean, people get very hung up on views and engagements and interactions and impressions, which can sometimes stop people, especially if they post something and they don't get the engagement they hope for. It kind of gives them a bit of fear around, oh, did nobody like it? But the magic is in those LinkedIn lurkers. It's in the people that don't actually engage. It is, you know, if you're posting content, people are out there watching the newsfeed all the time. They might not be engaging, but quite often it's the LinkedIn lurkers that are the ones watching, and they're the ones that will step forward when they're ready to, because you've stayed top of mind with them.
Yes, you mentioned earlier that you'll say to a lot of leaders, just start posting and don't worry about the engagement. One of the best bits of advice I got was on a business accelerator program I was on over the start of the pandemic, from a guy called Baiju Solanki, and I probably mentioned it on the podcast before. Baiju's shared this acronym with us, NATO, and NATO is not attached to the outcome. And I find that so powerful with social media, because you can spend so much time worrying about, do people like what I've posted, and you don't know who's lurking, you don't know who's engaging with it in ways you can't see, and it doesn't matter anyway. And if people aren't engaging with it, they're probably not seeing it. Put something else out, that's absolutely fine. So Phil, for you, how much do you measure that engagement, and how much attention do you pay to what posts are working and what aren't? And have you noticed any patterns in terms of what has the biggest resonance with the people that are following you?
Yes, I mean, the way I think about this, Andy, it would be kind of a bit like, let's just say you were thinking of placing an advert, and let's say it was targeted at people that like Formula One racing. Where's the best place for you to place your billboard for that advert? It's probably not going to be on a country road or perhaps on an A road. But if you put that billboard on the road that leads into Silverstone, you're probably going to get more relatable eyeballs on your post than anything else, because all the people piling in are all Formula One fans. So you want them to see it because they are your engaged audience. So therefore, for me, when we think about content again, we just loop us back to where we were earlier. I've decided what my lanes are, and I'll put blogs and content out on those particular subject matters in order that I'm reaching the specific people who are really more interested in that type of theme fundamentally. So when I do post, yeah, I will have a look. Okay, is this one flying? Is this one just been read? And on average, I mean, I don't have a large LinkedIn network, maybe about 5,000, something like that. I try and curate my network more specifically, and this might be another good question for Sam in a moment. Is what's better, scale or specialism? I, for me, I've always gone with specialism. So I look at every invite that comes in. I don't connect with everybody. What I'm really interested in is the quality of the people that I have there, and therefore, if I'm posting that content to that community, they are the people that I'm fundamentally trying to influence. People in senior leadership positions. Decision makers, entrepreneurs that own their own companies, that kind of play. They're the sort of audience that I'm talking to. And so with about 5,000 people in my network, an average post, which might not necessarily have a lot in it, just maybe just a quick thought, might be seen by 1,000. Uh, Probably my most successful was 200,000. And when I look at the difference as to what people tend to engage with, people tend to engage a lot more with um, generally something that's probably empathetic. They love hearing. So the most popular post was actually to do with the letter that somebody gets if they apply for any sort of job at Brother. Someone just writes a letter in and says, "Hello, have you got any vacancies?" If we haven't, we respond to everybody, but what they get back is a letter from me, which kind of encourages them to stay on with the search. And although we haven't got any, to sort of give them a little bit of motivation to say, "Look, Colonel Sanders knocked on 1,000 doors and don't give up. So even though we don't have anything, keep your journey going." That just absolutely flew. So I think the winning pattern is always, I think, just bringing a human element to the thing that you're posting about. Yes, I'm posting about technology sometimes, or trends, or cultural leadership, but when there's a genuine empathetic theme within that, I think those things tend to resonate with people. Clearly, post-pandemic, also too, I think we're just in a sort of a new area of sensitivity around empathy.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you on that. What I've seen, the posts that have the most engagement on my news feed are where people are being a bit more open, a bit more vulnerable, or talking about others with that sense of empathy. And Phil, you shared a lot for my book, Just Ask, on vulnerability. So I know that you're very tuned into that, and I think that comes through in the way that you engage socially. Now, you've given me an opening onto my current hobby horse, so I can't ignore that. And anyone who listened to last week's interview on the podcast with Ruth Gottien will have heard me talk about the changes at LinkedIn in terms of not allowing you anymore to reply to people who are sending you a connection request, but using the template LinkedIn, "I'd like to add you to my personal network" message, which is very difficult because I have the same approach as you. I mean, my approach is, if I don't know you and I don't know why you want to connect, I will ask you. I won't just delete it. Now I'm left not with that option, but to accept or delete, which I think is a major miss by LinkedIn, and a real issue. How have you approached connection requests from people you don't know that haven't been personalized to date, and how would this impact that?
Well, from my side, Andy, I get a lot of LinkedIn connection requests, and they can be at different times, of course. If you've just spoken on stage at a conference, they come firing in, and it's highly likely that somebody's seen you speak and just wants to connect with you. So it's like yes all the way through. But if I haven't done that, and you're getting lots of just random connections through, and particularly for me, there are certain roles and industries, for example, let's say recruitment or even technology services, whatever, where I get far more than perhaps any other of a sector. And if it's just somebody that's just sent a request and hasn't added any personalization in it, who from those industries, probably rare that I tend to sort of approve those. But what I will do is if I did decline that, I would have a quick look to see if we've got connections in common, whether they might have read a post of mine recently or shared it, whatever that might be. Because it could well be that someone's just generally read a post and thought, that's great, I'd like to connect with you. Brilliant. So I go, yeah, that's absolutely fine, because they want to keep in touch with some of the things that you talk about. But for me, when an invitation is personalized, it goes right to the top of the heap. Because you can actually see what's going on and go, oh yeah, I saw you speak, or I've heard this, or I've heard the other, and therefore I'm personalised this request, and then it's far easier for me to let somebody into my LinkedIn network.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if there's one message from this: personalize your connection request. Sam, quality or
Yeah.
quantity?
Well, I think it depends on the role. So, as a leader, I think it's okay to be quite selective about who you accept into your network. If, however, I'm talking to a sales division and their role is about prospecting, it's about targeting new accounts, expanding existing accounts, etc. It's a different situation. So, as a leader, I wouldn't be expecting someone to be out there actively prospecting, building their network proactively. But obviously, you do want to probably keep your network quite tight, because you will be targeted as a leader by all sorts of people trying to, get into that organization. So just a simple thing like changing your title on your professional headline from job title at company will help, because if you have a professional headline that doesn't actually have your job title in the professional headline, you're less likely to be targeted as a leader, by people that are looking to sell something to you. So I think it's okay to be quite protective about your network in a leadership position, just like you are, Phil. I am, and again, it depends on the role. I will always look at somebody's profile before I accept them. I also highly agree with the personalization thing. In fact, I teach something called hyper personalization. There are 20 different points you could pick out on someone's profile that you could reference when you go to connect with them. I have certain things on my profile, like the fact that the Algarve is my home from home and the football team I support and things like that. So when someone references anything that's on my profile when they go to connect with me, I know that they've taken the time to read my profile. And whenever we're teaching salespeople, marketing people, anyone at all, or leaders to connect, then the personalization is absolutely critical. So I think it depends on the role you have in the business as to how open you would be to building your network.
And if anyone reads my profile, one of the things they can use is I ask them to personalize connection requests. So that's often a very good clue as well. We're coming towards the end of our time, and I know I said I would come back to a certain question. I haven't forgotten. The conversation has flowed a certain way. So I'm going to go to Sam first before Phil on this one. Sam, how much time do you think a busy leader should be looking to invest in their time, and we'll say on LinkedIn?
So taking LinkedIn, I would say that a leader could do it in 10 to 15 minutes a day maximum. And that includes engagement and content. If you're posting 3 times a week, and you're doing a minimal amount of engagement on the news feed, and just going through your connection requests, 10 to 15 minutes a day, everybody's got 10 to 15 minutes a day. And especially if you know that it directly impacts your talent acquisition, it directly impacts your own personal brand and reputation, and it directly influences how people perceive you within your organization, then for me, 10 to 15 minutes a day is not something that should be ignored.
And Phil, that question: how long do you spend on LinkedIn, and how long do you spend on social media generally?
Andy, I'm actually within the parameters that Sam just referenced there. So generally speaking, about 15 minutes a day, in all honesty. So when somebody says I'm too busy to do that, I sort of would challenge that and just go, No, it's because it's probably not a priority for you. That's the difference. If it was a priority for you, you would make time for it and schedule time for it. So my secret sauce is, before I go to work every day, I am at a coffee shop at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I spend an hour in the coffee shop. And about 35 to 40 minutes of that is reading. That's increasing my general knowledge, reading books, and the remaining is doing my social. And so therefore I can get on top of anything. And if I'm thinking I might want to just, sometimes it will just be, I'll write a LinkedIn post and use that 20 minutes for one single LinkedIn post. Another day it could just be engaging, liking things, commenting on things, just generally keeping the engagement levels up. I use 4 social media platforms. So I use LinkedIn. I have 2 Twitter accounts, one my professional me and one which is a slightly more personal me, talking more to the cycling community. I also use Instagram, primarily for much more personal things, and I have that one protected. So I'm quite protective about that area. That one is really sort of my personal space. So across those, I probably built up a following of 40 to 50,000 connections, something like that. And so I feel I can manage those quite well within that time frame that Sam has mentioned. I think if it got much more substantial than that, then I think you need to proportionately up the amount of time that you do give to it. But absolutely, it should be a priority for you.
Fantastic. I know that we've positioned this podcast as about social media generally, but LinkedIn is going to be the primary channel for most business leaders. So just to finish off, you've mentioned you use Twitter, you've mentioned you've used Instagram. I'm not on Snapchat, so I don't know if you're using that or TikTok, Phil. But how important for your professional role do you think channels other than LinkedIn are, or are there other reasons that you engage with them?
Yeah, for me, it is channels fundamentally. LinkedIn is primarily a B2B audience, but equally on Twitter, I've carved off a B2B audience in the professional me. But equally, I have a passion for road cycling, and I've built up a community of sort of 9,000 followers or something on which we just talk about specifically cycling. So for me, it's always about curating for your audience, and sometimes I think that's it. How are you being seen as a specialist, an expert in your field? Fundamentally, I'm not a social influencer. I'm not trying to be a social influencer. I'm not trying to build millions of followers. What I am trying to do, though, is influence people's opinion who I believe is important, who brother are trying to reach. And therefore I use primarily Twitter on my B2B part of it, on my B2B profile, and LinkedIn as my 2 primary channels. But what I will also say, Andy, is that when you are the leader of an organization, you got to be in the content business. And providing you get your head in the content business, what you realize is you've got to give in this competencies. PR is one of those as well. And if you can create content, and a great place to practice creating content is social media channels, then you create better content for some of the above the line channels too. So more journalists want to engage with you, and you get in some of the highbrow media, the Telegraphs, the Management Todays, all of these sort of places where actually, again, you get further reach. And actually, I think you build your subject matter expertise. So for me, this is really about getting engaged in the content business, and then using the tools available to you, regardless of what platform that is, to carry your message. And I do recall somebody some years ago, Andy, saying something to me when I was with them, which was, it's not what you know or who you know, it's who knows you. And fundamentally, content creation and use of digital channels is going to really, really add to that.
Well, I can't think of a better way of finishing a podcast than having my own words thrown back at me. And you've made a very compelling argument there, Phil, for leaders getting involved in social media. Sam, Phil, thank you both so much for joining me on the Connected Leadership Podcast.
Thanks, Ed.
Thanks, Andy. Great to have us on, and really excited to get the feedback.
So thank you very much to both Sam and Phil. I knew that would be an engaging discussion. There were so many more things I could have asked them about, but what I like about that conversation is it's both practical, but also makes that compelling argument as to the why you need to involve. So it's there on the strategic and the tactical level. So hopefully there's a lot you can take from that. If you've enjoyed this, if you found it useful, where better to post it than on LinkedIn or on other social media channels? Leave a review, post a rating, anything that you can do to spread the word and help us get more listeners to the podcast. That would be great. And whatever you do, join us again next week for another Connected Leadership podcast.